Welcome back, class. We're going to talk about it in chapter 6. We're getting into the second segment of it. And we're going to go into how the maximization, self-interest, optimization, opportunity costs, marginal decision-making process impacts the marketplace. And the authors talk about probably the most influential economics book or economics text, at least in their, I guess, perception from their aspect. It's An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Adam Smith, I think this book was probably published in mid to late 1700s. He was a Scottish economist. And he says in his book, pursuit of self-interest in a marketplace will promote general interest. Very, very astute, but one of the first economists to start moving and start providing descriptions of concepts. And then he also says resources led to the best use by the invisible hand drives market to equilibrium. And that's where, when you start taking some of these econ classes, and I've mentioned it a time or two so far, that's where you get the concept of invisible hand. There's a visible hand that is actually the marketplace itself, and it's driving supply and demand. It's driving it to that equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Again, intersection of downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply when it clears the market. So there's no surplus, no shortage. The curves clear the market, and that is equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And that's what we have talked about in some of the earlier chapters. And again, the invisible hand is the marketplace, and it is guiding it, this invisible hand. And sometimes in econ textbooks, you see this hand sitting above the intersection of the curves, implying that there's an invisible hand somewhere that's driving it. And for the most part, there is an invisible hand because it's the marketplace. It's buyers and sellers coming together, different perceptions, different value concepts, different functional relationships. But at the end of the day, it's that marketplace that drives supply and demand to those equilibrium points. And then he also talks about individuals maximizing their own net benefits, and they maximize the net benefit of the market. And so while it wasn't specific maybe in Adam Smith's writings, this is maybe the offshoot of those writings. And this is more of what economists are thinking now in the present day. They're trying to maximize those net benefits. And remember what we say in the first section, at that point where marginal benefit equals marginal cost, your net benefits are maximized. If net benefits of all economic activities are maximized, the allocation of resources is efficient. Nothing's wasted. And as I said in the first segment, think about production possibilities curve. And the concept of maximizing net benefits, it encompasses more than the production possibilities curve, because production possibilities curve, remember, all resources are fully utilized, efficient production process, using technology and entrepreneurship. And the production possibilities curve, it focused on comparative advantage. Now we're talking about consumption efficiency, because if you think about net benefits, what are two parameters that have to be satisfied to hit those net benefits? A, producers produce things that consumers want. Starbucks produces a cup of coffee that you want. I like a really good hamburger. I haven't found any really good hamburgers in Nashville yet, but found some great barbecue places, and those barbecue places are producing what I want. Individuals are making choices, and they're making choices based on their utility functions because they want to maximize that benefit or the satisfaction of consuming goods and services. So that's what producers want. Producers are also going to make their greatest profit if they produce what consumers want, and if the products are distributed to the right customers. Go back to the decisions that firms are faced with. What are we going to produce? So that's trying to figure out what consumers want. How are we going to produce it? Most efficient way possible, so using scarce resources. To whom or for whom do we produce it? And that's how you're going to get it distributed to the right customers. And then lastly, you're always keeping some resources in reserve. And then if you go back to the capitalistic market economy and the socialist market economy, and the theory behind those, the big distribution and the two market economies on the tails there, it depends on who owns the resources and who makes the decision on how those resources are consumed in the production function, and then how the goods and services are distributed to a consuming population. And that's what we're talking about here. Producers produce what you and I want, and then producers have to make sure that it is distributed to you and me so that that we can maximize our utility. And then the authors jump in and they use an example about, I think it's chocolate chip cookie, some kind of a cookie in the textbook. And they get into the competitive market for the allocation of resources to be efficient. And some of the constraints are, some of the parameters in that is there have to be many buyers and sellers. Individuals jockeying in the market, negotiating at each stage of that cookie making process. Thousands, millions of buyers and sellers working in different market economies, negotiating rates and moving the goods and services along the line so that you get that final cookie. And they talk about entry and exit is easy. Entry and exit in a lot of markets is easy. And then they talk about no single buyer seller controls price. Prices are flexible and determined by what? Determined by supply and demand. Determined by Adam Smith's invisible hand. Determined by the market. Those factors or forces in the market are determining the price. And so unless you have a market, and we'll get into it a little later in the text, but unless you have a market where it's like a monopolistic market or an oligopoly or some type of market where there are very few buyers and sellers, or buyers and sellers have enough market power that they can dictate price, the competitive market is going to drive that supply and demand to equilibrium and establish a equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And when we're talking about the cookie example, they talk about the invisible hand guiding the markets, coordination, communication, cooperation, all of them working together, all of these firms, all of these market economies working together around the globe to get the economic resources to the cookie maker so that the cookie maker can make something that you as a consumer enjoys. And at that point, they start moving in the text, they start moving into property rights. And I think this is it's a concept that some texts that I've used in the past kind of gloss over, but I think it's an important concept when we talk about property rights. And it's a set of rules that satisfy the ways in which owners can use resources. And that's who owns the resource, because you as the owner want to be able to use that resource unfettered. The government must enforce property rights. Markets will, potentially collapse, and there's no exchange in the marketplace if there's not property rights. And I guess I think in the text, they talk about John Locke, who says, where there is no law, there is no freedom. And I agree with him. No law, no freedom. And where you're talking about property rights, and who talks about law and freedom, think about the issues that we're seeing in places like San Francisco and Portland and Seattle, especially, and there are other areas, other pockets, Los Angeles, across the United States, where there does not appear to be any law. There doesn't appear to be the property rights that are being enforced. Individuals walking into stores and just taking whatever they want and walking out with it, and nobody is attempting to stop them. So they're starting to infringe on property rights of the owners. And if the owners don't have property rights, it's going to be extremely difficult for market forces to drive the market to equilibrium. And then they mention the next, I guess, definition they mention is they talk about a property right, talking about exclusive property rights. And they say a property right that allows its owner to prevent others from using that resource. Again, how do you think the owners in some of these large cities that, and Chicago had around with it too, and New York City's having around with it. I mean, huge opportunities of business owners that they are losing assets because they can't, or the law is not enforcing their property rights. And then lastly, you talk about transferable property rights, a property right that allows the owner of a resource to sell or lease it to someone else. And that, at the end of the day, is what most firms are doing. They're either selling or leasing those resources to somebody else, maybe to another firm. Maybe they're selling, again, go back selling cookies. They're selling cookies to consumers. Starbucks sells a cup of coffee to you. And they're talking about property rights and exclusive property rights and transferable property rights. Starbucks has the exclusive property rights to that cup of coffee that they turn around and transfer those property rights to you. It is your cup of coffee. Once you pay them for that cup of coffee, it becomes your cup of coffee. And if you walk outside and somebody knocks you down and takes your cup of coffee away from you, then the market at that point is starting to collapse. There are no laws that are enforcing these property rights. And the next definition they go into, it talks about an efficient condition, a situation that requires a competitive market with well-defined and transferable property rights. So that's their efficiency condition. And to achieve an efficient allocation of resources, property rights have to be exclusive, and property rights have to be transferable. Two things. And if you go back to John Locke, without laws, there is no freedom. And if you think in a context, again, take this and distill it down to what happens you on a daily basis. If you're a Fisk student, you're just seeing this, probably undergraduate students in this class, you're going into the cafeteria, let's say at lunch. Cafeteria has the exclusive property rights to provide you that food. They turn around and they transfer that property right to you once you pay for your food. And if somebody takes your food away from you, then that's when the market starts to collapse. That's when the market is based on property rights that, while they may have been exclusive in the cafeteria and they transferred it to you, once it's transferable to you and it becomes your exclusive property right, and somebody takes it away from you, then at that point, it's not an exclusive property right anymore. So for the markets to be efficient, for the markets to move and to reach equilibrium in an efficient manner, we've got to have those two parameters met. Exclusive property rights, and they have to be transferable. I'm going to stop there with this segment. And when I come back, we're going to talk about competitive markets. Talk to everybody in a few minutes.